My name is Khan, and for 20 years I walked the sterile hallways of one of the largest hospitals in Tehran, believing that I held the power of life and death in my hands. As a specialist in internal medicine, I was the one people looked to when their bodies failed them. The man in the white coat who issued diagnoses and prescribed cures with the confidence of someone who understands the machinery of human biology. I was a man of science, but I was also a man of deep faith, a devout Muslim who never missed his prayers and who believed with every fiber of his being that there was no God but Allah and Muhammad was his messenger. I recited the Quran daily, believing that my good deeds, my charity, and my dedication to saving lives would weigh heavily on the scales of judgment. Yet in the span of a single hour, everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the hereafter was shattered. I discovered that despite all my years of study and all the lives I had saved, I was utterly helpless to save my own, and the only true doctor in the universe was not the one I bowed to in the mosque, but the one I met when my heart stopped beating. Growing up in Iran, the sound of the adhan calling the faithful to prayer was the soundtrack of my life, a beautiful and haunting rhythm that dictated the flow of our days. My father was a strict man, highly respected in our community, and he ensured that I knew the importance of submission to the will of Allah from a very young age. We were taught that Islam was the final and complete religion, and that Christians and Jews had lost their way, corrupting the books that were sent to them. I viewed Jesus, or Isa as we called him, merely as a great prophet, a man of respect, but certainly not the Son of God, and definitely not the Savior of mankind. To believe that God could have a son was considered shirk, the greatest sin, blasphemy that could condemn a soul to hell. I carried this belief into my medical practice, viewing my work as a form of worship, a way to serve Allah by preserving His creation. I felt a sense of spiritual superiority, pitying those who did not follow the path of the Prophet, believing that my discipline in prayer and my success in medicine were signs of Allah's favor upon me. It was a Tuesday afternoon, typical in every way, with the waiting room overflowing with patients coughing and complaining of various ailments. I had been feeling a dull ache in the center of my chest since the morning prayer, but I dismissed it as indigestion or perhaps the stress of a long week, the kind of denial that doctors often have about their own health. I was writing a prescription for an elderly woman with hypertension when the room suddenly tilted violently to the left. The pen slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the desk, and a crushing weight, heavier than anything I had ever imagined, slammed into my chest, as if an invisible elephant had stepped directly onto my sternum. I tried to gasp for air, but my lungs refused to expand, and a cold sweat instantly drenched my shirt. I saw the elderly woman's eyes go wide with terror as I clutched my chest and collapsed onto the linoleum floor. I could hear the shouting of nurses, the frantic footsteps of my colleagues rushing toward me, but their voices sounded like they were coming from underwater, distant and muffled. I remember the face of my colleague, Dr. Farhad, hovering over me, his eyes filled with panic as he shouted for a crash cart and began chest compressions. It was a surreal irony to be on the floor, looking up at the people I usually commanded, realizing that all my knowledge, all my prestige, and all my years of service to the community meant absolutely nothing in this moment. I tried to recite the Shahada, the declaration of faith, because as a Muslim, I knew that these should be my last words to ensure a good standing with Allah. I tried to move my lips to say, La ilaha illa Allah, but my body had already severed its connection to my will. The pain in my chest exploded into a blinding white light, and then, just as suddenly, the pain vanished completely. The chaos of the hospital room, the beeping of the monitors, and the shouting of the staff faded into an absolute, terrifying silence. I was no longer on the floor. I was floating near the ceiling, looking down at a body that looked strangely like mine, surrounded by a frenzy of medical activity. I watched as they cut open my shirt and applied the defibrillator pads to my chest, my body jerking violently with each electric shock, but I felt nothing but a growing sense of detachment. I saw Dr. Farhad shake his head, checking the time on his watch, and I knew the medical protocol. He was calling the time of death. I wanted to shout at them, to tell them I was still here, hovering right above them, but I had no voice, and the scene below me began to fade into a thick, suffocating darkness. I had been taught that upon death, two angels, Munkar and Nakir, would come to question me in the grave about my faith, asking who is my Lord and who is my prophet. I braced myself for this interrogation, ready to answer that Allah is my Lord and Islam is my religion. But no angels came. Instead, the darkness deepened, becoming a tangible, heavy substance that pressed against my soul, filled with a sense of loneliness and dread that is impossible to describe in human language. In that oppressive void, I realized that I was sinking, descending into a place where hope did not exist, a place completely devoid of the presence of God. I began to scream out in my spirit, crying out to Allah, reciting verses from the Quran, pleading for mercy, reminding him of my prayers, my fasting during Ramadan, and my charity. "O Allah, I have served you. I have been faithful." I screamed into the abyss, but there was no answer, only the echoing silence of the void. The fear that gripped me was absolute. It was the realization that my religion, my culture, and my rituals were like a rope made of sand, disintegrating now that I needed them the most. I was a doctor who could not save himself, and I was a religious man whose religion was silent. I felt the heat rising from below, a terrifying reality that the hell I had read about was real, but the path to escape it was not what I had been taught. I was lost, utterly and completely, plummeting into eternal separation. Then, in the midst of that hopeless descent, a light appeared far above me, a tiny pinprick that grew rapidly in size and intensity. It was not the harsh, artificial light of the hospital, nor was it the burning fire of the sun. It was a living light, brilliant and pure, radiating a warmth that pierced through the cold darkness of the void. As the light descended toward me, the darkness fled, unable to exist in its presence, and the terrifying feeling of falling stopped. Standing in the center of that glorious light was a man. He was not dressed in the robes of an imam or the silks of a king, but in simple, dazzling white garments that seemed to be woven from light itself. I did not need anyone to tell me who he was. My spirit recognized him instantly, not from the teachings of the mosque, but from a deep, instinctive knowledge that struck me to my core. This was not the Prophet Muhammad. This was not Ali. This was Isa al-Masih. This was Jesus. But this was not the Jesus I had heard about in the Quran, who was merely a messenger who brought a book and vanished. This man radiated an authority and a power that belonged only to God. As he looked at me, I saw eyes that were like flames of fire, yet filled with an ocean of love so vast that it broke me instantly. In Islam, we fear Allah, we submit to Him, we obey Him, but we do not speak of this kind of intimate, overwhelming love. I fell to my knees, not because I was forced to, but because His Majesty compelled me to bow. He reached out a hand toward me, and I saw the scar in his wrist, the mark of a nail. It was a shock to my theology, for I had been taught that Jesus was never crucified, that Allah took him up and someone else died in his place. Yet here he was, bearing the marks of a sacrifice I had been told never happened. He spoke to me, and his voice sounded like the rushing of many waters, yet it was gentle enough to heal the terror in my soul. "Khan," he said, calling me by my name, a name he knew before the foundations of the world. "You have spent your life trying to heal the bodies of men, but you cannot heal the sickness of the soul. I am the great physician. I am the only doctor who can save you from the death you have just tasted." I looked up at him, trembling, tears streaming from my eyes, stripping away the pride of the doctor and the pride of the religious man. "Lord," I whispered, using a title I never thought I would use for him. I thought I was on the right path. I prayed. I served. Jesus looked at me with deep compassion and said, "The path to life is not found in the works of your hands or the rituals of your fathers. It is found in me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." He showed me in a flash of understanding that my sin, not just my bad deeds, but the very nature of my heart, was a sickness that no amount of prayer or charity could cure. Just as a cancer patient cannot cure himself by being a nice person, a sinner cannot cure his soul by religious rituals. He explained that he came to earth not just to teach, but to be the cure, to take the poison of sin upon himself on that cross, so that I could be healed. "You are a doctor," he continued. "You know that for a life to be saved, sometimes blood must be given. I gave my blood so that you would not have to perish in that darkness." The logic was perfect, divine, and undeniable. All my life I had tried to earn salvation like a wage, but he was offering it to me as a gift, a medicine paid for by his own life. The burden of trying to be good enough for Allah fell off my shoulders, replaced by the freedom of being loved by Jesus. Then, his expression became serious, and he pointed toward the earth, which looked like a small, fragile blue sphere in the distance. "I am sending you back," he said firmly. I immediately began to protest. "No, Lord, please. Do not send me back to that dark world. Let me stay here in your light. I do not want to go back to the pain, the lies, the emptiness. The peace I felt in his presence was addictive. It was the home I had been searching for all my life without knowing it. But he shook his head gently. You must go back. My children are sleeping, and the world is dying. The time is very short, Khan. I am coming soon, sooner than anyone expects. You must tell them what you have seen. You must tell them that the great physician is offering the cure before the time runs out. He showed me a vision of the world, and I saw millions of people like me, Muslims, secularists, people of all faiths walking blindly toward the edge of a cliff, unaware of the darkness that awaited them below. Go and tell them, he commanded, his voice echoing with the power of thunder. Tell them that salvation is not a reward for the righteous, but a gift for the repentant. Tell them I am coming to judge the earth and to gather those who have accepted my cure. I wanted to cling to his feet, to beg him to take me now, but a force pulled me backward. The light began to recede, and the beautiful face of Jesus moved further away. Do not fear, he said, his voice fading but remaining clear in my heart. I am with you always. I felt the sensation of falling again, but this time it was not into darkness, but a rapid, dizzying descent back into the heaviness of the physical realm. I felt a massive jolt, like falling from a tall building and hitting the ground, and suddenly, pain rushed back into my body. My chest burned, my throat was sore, and the bright, sterile lights of the hospital room blinded me. I gasped, a huge, desperate intake of air filling my lungs, and my eyes snapped open. I was not on the floor anymore. I was on a gurney, covered in a sheet. A nurse who was standing nearby screamed and dropped the tray she was holding. Dr. Farhad, who was filling out paperwork in the corner of the room, spun around, his face draining of color as if he had seen a ghost. Khan, he stammered, his voice trembling. That is impossible. You were gone. We called the time. You have been dead for over an hour. I tried to sit up, my body weak and trembling, wires and tubes pulling at my skin. The room was spinning, but my mind was crystal clear. I looked at my colleagues, men of science who had no explanation for what they were seeing, and then I looked at my own hands. They were the hands of a doctor. Yes, but they were no longer the hands of a man who believed in the power of his own works. I took a shaky breath, the presence of Jesus still lingering around me like a warm blanket in that cold room. I was dead. I rasped, my voice weak but steady. But I met the doctor who brought me back, and he has a message for us all. The chaos that erupted in the room the moment I spoke was unlike anything I had ever witnessed in my 2 decades of practicing medicine. The nurse who had dropped the tray was now sobbing hysterically against the wall, her hands covering her mouth as if she had witnessed a violation of the natural order, which, in a sense, she had. Dr. Farhad, a man I had known for years as a stoic and rational professional, was trembling visibly, his face pale and beaded with sweat as he fumbled for his stethoscope. He approached me with hesitation, as if he feared that touching me would cause me to vanish into smoke. When he placed the cold metal disc against my chest, I saw his eyes widen in utter disbelief. My heart, which had been silent and still for over an hour, was now beating with a strong, rhythmic thrum, pumping life back into my cold limbs. There was no arrhythmia, no struggle, just the steady, powerful beat of a heart that had been restarted by the creator of the universe himself. The monitors, which had been flatlined and screaming their high-pitched tone of death, were now beeping steadily, a rhythmic confirmation that the impossible had just occurred. The medical team scrambled into action, their shock giving way to their training, though the atmosphere in the room remained thick with fear and confusion. They began shouting orders, calling for oxygen, for fluids, for a barrage of tests to determine how a dead man was suddenly awake and speaking. I was lifted from the gurney onto a transport bed, and as they wheeled me out of the room, I caught a glimpse of the wall clock. It confirmed what my spirit already knew, but my mind struggled to grasp. I had been dead for 65 minutes. In the world of medicine, after 6 minutes without oxygen, the brain begins to suffer irreversible damage. After 10 minutes, severe brain death is all but guaranteed. Yet here I was, after more than an hour of total cessation of life, watching the hospital ceiling tiles pass by with crystal clear vision, my mind sharper and more alert than it had been before I collapsed. I tried to speak, to tell them that they didn't need to panic, but they placed an oxygen mask over my face, instructing me to rest, treating me as a patient in critical condition rather than the walking miracle I was. They rushed me into the intensive care unit, a place where I had spent countless nights treating others, but now the roles were reversed, and I felt the peculiar vulnerability of being the one in the bed. The nurses worked with frantic efficiency, hooking me up to more advanced monitors, inserting 4 lines into my arms, and drawing vials of blood to analyze the chemistry of my resurrection. I could hear their whispers as they moved around me, snippets of conversation that revealed their terror. "He was blue," one whispered. "He was cold. I touched him. He was gone," said another. They looked at me with a mixture of awe and suspicion, as if I were a ghost that had decided to haunt the ICU. I wanted to tell them that they were right, that the Khan they knew had indeed died, and the man lying in this bed was someone who had been sent back with a purpose. But I remained silent for the moment, the oxygen mask fogging with my breath, my mind replaying the image of those eyes. The eyes of Jesus, that burned with a love so intense it made the fluorescent lights of the hospital look dim and sickly by comparison. Dr. Farhad returned to my bedside after reviewing the initial scans, holding the clipboard with a grip so tight his knuckles were white. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, looking deep into my eyes, searching for signs of neurological damage, for the blank stare of a man whose brain had been starved of oxygen. "Khan," he said, his voice low and shaking, "I don't know how to explain this. We have run the EKGs, the EEGs, everything. Your brain activity is normal. In fact, it's perfect. Your heart has no signs of the infarction that killed you. It is as if—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence because science provided no end to it. "It is as if it never happened. But we all saw it. We called the time. You were dead, my friend." I pulled the oxygen mask down, my throat still feeling the phantom sensation of the transition between worlds. "I was dead, Farhad," I said calmly. "And I would have stayed dead, lost in a darkness you cannot imagine, if he hadn't pulled me out." Farhad frowned, assuming I was speaking of Allah in the general sense, but he didn't press me. He simply shook his head, a man of science confronted with a reality that shattered his textbooks. As the hours passed and the initial frenzy of the medical staff subsided, I was left alone in the dim light of the ICU room, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, the only sound keeping me company. It was in this solitude that the full weight of what happened began to settle upon me, heavier than the chest pain that had killed me. I was a Muslim man, born and raised in the Islamic Republic of Iran, a country where the very air we breathed was infused with the laws of the Quran. All my life, I had been taught that Jesus was a prophet, yes, but only a man, a messenger who came before Muhammad. I was taught that the Christians were wrong, that they had fabricated the story of the crucifixion, and that God had no son. But the man I met in the light, he bore the scars. I saw the hole in his wrist. I felt the power that emanated from him, a power that did not belong to a prophet but to a king. The theology I had defended for 50 years crumbled into dust in the face of the reality I had experienced. It was not an intellectual debate anymore. It was an undeniable fact. Jesus was alive, he was God, and he was the only reason I was breathing air in this hospital room right now. The door to my room opened slowly, and my wife Fatima stepped in, her face hidden behind her chatter, but her eyes red and swollen from crying. She had been called to the hospital with the news that her husband had died, that she was now a widow who would have to bury the father of her children. When she saw me sitting up, propped against the pillows, she let out a cry that was half scream, half sob, and rushed to the side of the bed. She grabbed my hand, pressing it against her wet cheek, weeping uncontrollably, murmuring prayers of thanksgiving to Allah. "They told me you were gone," she choked out between sobs. "I was praying, Khan. I was praying to Allah to have mercy, and he sent you back." I looked at her, my heart breaking with a complex mixture of love and fear. She was thanking Allah, but I knew it wasn't Allah who had stood in that light. It was Jesus. And I knew that if I told her this truth, that her husband was now a follower of the Christian God, it could destroy our family. In Iran, leaving Islam is not just a change of mind. It is a crime, a betrayal of blood and nation. I held Fatima's hand, stroking her fingers, feeling the terrifying burden of the secret I now carried. The command of Jesus echoed in my ears. You must tell them. It was not a suggestion. It was a directive from the sovereign of the universe. But as I looked at my wife, a devout woman who feared the mullahs and loved her traditions, fear gripped my throat. How could I tell her that everything we believed was incomplete? How could I tell her that the only way to salvation was through the man our religion claimed was merely a prophet? The conflict within me was violent, a war between the safety of my earthly life and the truth of my eternal soul. I realized then that being brought back to life was the easy part. living this new life, with this dangerous truth in a land that would reject it, was going to be the true test. I was a stranger in my own life, a man who had seen the other side and could no longer fit into the shape of the world he had left behind. Night fell over Tehran, and the hospital quieted down, but sleep was impossible for me. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that void, feeling the suffocating darkness, the absolute hopelessness of a soul separated from God. The memory of that terror was so vivid that I would gasp for air, my heart racing, terrified that I might slip back into it if I let my guard down. But then, the image would shift, and I would see him again, the light of the world, standing in the void, his hand reaching out. That contrast was the most powerful medicine I had ever known. I realized that the peace I thought I had as a Muslim was merely a lack of conflict, but the peace Jesus gave was a living presence that drove out fear. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and I began to whisper to him, not in the formal Arabic prayers I had recited my whole life, but in Farsi, in the intimate language of my heart. "Lord Jesus," I whispered, the name feeling strange but sweet on my tongue. "You saved me. You sent me back. Give me the courage to do what you asked. Do not let me fail you." The next morning, the news of my recovery had spread throughout the hospital and likely beyond. Colleagues from other departments came by, claiming they just wanted to check on me. But I knew they were there to see the miracle man. They asked medical questions, looking for a physiological explanation, a blood clot that moved, a misdiagnosis, a machine error. I answered them politely, but with a vagueness that frustrated them. I knew that soon I would have to stop being vague. I would have to speak the name that was burning a hole in my chest. Dr. Farhad came in to check my charts again, shaking his head as he noted that my vitals were better than they had been in years. "You are a lucky man, Khan," he said, tapping his pen on the clipboard. "Luck has nothing to do with it, Farhad," I replied, my voice steady. "I have a second chance, and I intend to use it." He looked at me, sensing the change in my demeanor, the gravity in my words that went beyond the relief of survival. He didn't ask what I meant, perhaps because he was afraid of the answer, but the seed was planted. As the day progressed, I began to feel a physical strength returning that shouldn't have been possible so soon. I sat on the edge of the bed, dangling my legs, looking out the window at the sprawling city of Tehran. I saw the minarets of the mosques in the distance, the smog hovering over the busy streets, the millions of people going about their lives, oblivious to the precipice they were walking on. I remembered the vision Jesus showed me, the world blindly walking toward the edge. These were my people, my neighbors, my patients, my family. They were all like I had been, sincere, devout, but lost without the cure. The fear of persecution began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of urgency. I was a doctor, and I had the only antidote for a fatal disease. To keep it to myself would be the ultimate malpractice. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the city, and made a vow to the one who had saved me. I would speak. I would tell them. No matter the cost, the doctor was back, and he had a new prescription for the soul of Iran. The days that followed my miraculous return to life were a blur of medical tests and bewildered colleagues. The hospital administration, eager to avoid any suggestion of malpractice or supernatural hysteria, classified my case as a spontaneous resuscitation following cardiac arrest, a rare but medically documented phenomenon known as the Lazarus syndrome. It was a convenient label, a scientific box to contain a reality that defied all science, but I knew the truth. I was discharged a week later, walking out of the hospital on my own 2 feet, leaving behind a trail of whispered rumors and shaken doctors. Returning to my home in the affluent suburbs of northern Tehran felt like stepping into a museum of my past life. The Persian rugs, the calligraphy of Quranic verses on the walls, the dedicated prayer room facing Mecca. It all belonged to a man named Khan who had died on that hospital floor. The man who returned was a stranger in his own house, carrying a fire in his chest that threatened to consume everything he had built. My wife, Fatima, was overjoyed to have me back, treating me with a tenderness bordering on reverence. She believed my survival was a direct answer to her prayers and a sign of Allah's favor upon our family. She organized a large dinner to celebrate my recovery, inviting our extended family, friends, and even the local imam, a man named Haji Reza, whom I had known for years. As the evening approached, the dread in my stomach grew heavier than the meal being prepared. I knew that this dinner would be the first true test of my vow to Jesus. I could stay silent, nod along as they praised Allah for my life, and keep my new faith hidden in the secret chambers of my heart. It would be safer. It would preserve my marriage, my reputation, and my safety. But every time I considered silence, I saw his face again, the eyes of fire and love, the scarred hand pointing to the dying world. I could not be a coward. I could not deny the one who had pulled me from the abyss. The house filled with the chatter of guests, the aroma of saffron rice and grilled lamb wafting through the air. My brothers, successful businessmen and engineers, clapped me on the back, joking about how I was too stubborn to die. My cousins, devout women in their chatters, offered prayers of thanksgiving. And then there was Haji Reza, sitting at the head of the table, his white turban and long beard commanding respect from everyone in the room. He smiled at me, a warm, paternal smile that I used to find comforting but now found unsettling. "Dr. Khan," he boomed, his voice filling the room. "Truly, Allah is the greatest. He has preserved you for a purpose. You must have been very dear to him for him to turn back the angel of death." The room fell silent, everyone looking at me, waiting for me to affirm his words, to recite the expected platitudes of our faith. I stood up, my legs feeling slightly weak, not from illness, but from the sheer magnitude of what I was about to do. I looked around the table at the faces of the people I loved, my wife, my brothers, my friends. I loved them, and because I loved them, I had to tell them the truth. "Thank you all for coming." I began, my voice trembling slightly before finding its strength. It is true that I was dead. I was gone. The doctors called the time. I was not just asleep. I had crossed the boundary. I paused, taking a deep breath. Haji Reza says that Allah preserved me. But I must tell you what I saw when my heart stopped. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The smiles faded, replaced by a confused tension. In our culture, one does not contradict an imam, especially not at a public gathering. I fell into a darkness, I continued, looking directly at the imam. A darkness so deep and terrifying that I realized no amount of prayer or charity could save me from it. I cried out to Allah, but the silence remained. I was sinking into a place of no return. I saw Fatima's eyes widen, her hand going to her mouth. This was not the story of a blessed man. This was the testimony of a man who had seen hell. "But then," I said, my voice rising with emotion, "a light came. A man came. He pulled me out of the darkness. He showed me his hands. I held up my own hands, mimicking the gesture Jesus had shown me. He had scars here. Marks of nails." A collective gasp went through the room. The air was suddenly sucked out of the space. Haji Reza's face darkened, his smile replaced by a scowl of deep disapproval. "Dr. Khan," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "You are confused. The trauma of the event has clouded your mind. We know that Prophet Isa was not crucified. This is the teaching of the Holy Quran." "I respected the Quran my whole life, Haji," I replied, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "But I cannot deny what my eyes saw and what my spirit knows. It was Jesus. He told me he is the great physician. He told me he is the way. He saved me when I could not save myself." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a taboo being shattered, of a line being crossed from which there is no return. My brother stood up, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "Khan, that is enough. You are delirious. Sit down." But I could not sit down. The fire was out now. "He is coming soon," I said, looking around the table, pleading with them to understand. "He showed me the world. We are sleeping on the edge of a cliff. He sent me back to warn you. Salvation is not earned. It is a gift from him." Haji Reza stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is blasphemy," he declared, pointing a finger at me. "You speak the lies of the infidels in your own house? After Allah spared you? You are possessed, Khan. You need spiritual cleansing, not a celebration." He turned and marched out of the house, followed quickly by several of the more devout guests who refused to stay in a home where such words were spoken. The party disintegrated into chaos. My wife was sobbing, fleeing to the kitchen. My brothers looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust, as if I had suddenly transformed into a monster. Within minutes, the house was empty of guests, leaving me standing alone in the dining room, the uneaten feast cold on the table, the echo of my confession hanging in the air. That night was the beginning of my isolation. Fatima refused to sleep in the same room with me, locking herself in the guest bedroom. My brothers stopped answering my calls. The community that had once held me in such high esteem now viewed me as a pariah, a man whose mind had been broken by death, or worse, a man who had been led astray by Shaitan. But amidst the rejection, a strange peace settled over me. I had spoken the name of Jesus. I had acknowledged him before men, just as the scriptures which I was now eager to read commanded. I went to my study, and for the first time, I did not reach for the Quran. I went to my computer and began searching for the Bible online, hungry to know more about the man who had saved me. As I read the Gospels, the words leaped off the screen, vibrant and alive. They were not just rules, they were a biography of the person I had met. Every word of Jesus in the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John resonated with the voice I had heard in the void. It was the same authority, the same love. 2 days later, I returned to work at the hospital. The atmosphere there had changed as well. News travels fast in Tehran, and the rumor that Dr. Khan had turned into a Christian fanatic had apparently reached the hospital corridors. Nurses avoided eye contact. Colleagues who used to seek my advice now gave me a wide berth. I was summoned to the office of the hospital director, Dr. Moradi, a stern man who was a political appointee as much as a medical administrator. He sat behind his large mahogany desk, looking at me over his spectacles. "Khan," he said, skipping the pleasantries, "we are hearing disturbing reports. People are saying you are preaching at dinner parties, talking about foreign ideas." "I am talking about what happened to me, Dr. Moradi," I said calmly. "I had a near-death experience. It is a documented phenomenon. I am simply sharing my truth." "Your truth is dangerous," he snapped. "We are an Islamic institution in an Islamic republic. We cannot have a senior doctor spreading confusion. You are here to treat bodies, not to save souls. Keep your hallucinations to yourself, or there will be consequences. Do you understand?" "I understand your position," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But I cannot lie about the one who saved my life. Jesus is the reason I am standing here to treat patients today." Muradi's face turned purple. "Get out," he hissed. "Consider this a formal warning. One more incident, one complaint from a patient or staff member, and you are finished here. And be careful, Khan. The walls have ears. You are playing with fire." I walked out of his office, realizing that the threats were real. In Iran, apostasy is punishable by death. I wasn't just risking my job, I was risking my life. Yet, as I walked down the hallway, I felt a boldness I had never possessed before. I saw a young man sitting in the waiting area, looking despondent, his head in his hands. I recognized him. He was a patient of mine with a chronic heart condition, a young student named Arash. I sat down next to him. "Arash," I said gently, "how are you feeling?" He looked up, his eyes dull and hopeless. "It's no use, doctor. The medication isn't working. I'm tired. I feel like there's no point." I looked around. The hallway was busy, but for a moment, we were in a bubble of privacy. I remembered the command. "Tell them." "Arash," I whispered, "I know what it is like to feel hopeless. I was dead last week." "Did you hear?" He nodded slowly. "I heard. I didn't come back because of medicine," I said, leaning closer. "I came back because I met the great physician. He healed my heart, not just the muscle, but the spirit. He loves you, Arash. He knows your pain." Arash looked at me, confusion and curiosity warring in his eyes. "Who?" he asked. "You mean Allah?" "I mean Isa al-Masih," I said, using the name he would recognize. "Jesus. He is alive, Arash. And he can give you a peace that this hospital cannot." For the first time, a spark of life appeared in the young man's eyes. It was a risk, a terrible risk, but as I saw that spark, I knew that this was my new practice. I was still a doctor of the body, but now I was an intern for the doctor of the soul. I walked away before anyone could overhear, my heart racing not with fear, but with the thrill of planting a seed in the desert. The persecution was coming. I could feel it like a storm on the horizon, but so was the harvest. And I was ready. The warning from Dr. Moradi was not an idle threat, and the storm I sensed on the horizon arrived faster than I expected. My conversation with Arash, brief as it was, had sparked a curiosity in him that led to questions, and questions in a society built on strict conformity are dangerous. He had come back to see me a few days later, not for a checkup, but to ask more about the piece I had mentioned. We spoke in hushed tones in my office, with the door slightly ajar so as not to arouse suspicion, but even whispers carry weight. I gave him a small New Testament I had managed to print out from the internet, hiding the loose pages inside a medical pamphlet about heart health. He took it as if it were gold, his hunger for truth palpable. But the walls indeed had ears. A nurse, one I had worked with for years, had noticed the closed-door meetings and the change in my demeanor. Loyalty to the regime often outweighs loyalty to colleagues, and she reported me. 3 weeks after my resurrection, I was in the middle of rounds when 2 men in plain clothes entered the ward. They didn't look like police, but anyone living in Iran knows the look of the basage or the intelligence officer's stern faces, cheap suits, and an aura of menacing authority. They walked straight to me, bypassing the nurse's station. "Dr. Khan," the taller one asked. It wasn't a question. "You need to come with us." "I have patience," I said, trying to maintain my composure, though my pulse hammered in my throat. "Your patients are no longer your concern," the man replied, gripping my arm with a force that made it clear I had no choice. They led me out of the hospital, not in handcuffs, but flanked so closely that escape was impossible. As we passed the reception, I saw Dr. Farhad. He looked up, saw the men, and quickly looked down at his papers, his face pale. He knew. Everyone knew. In Iran, when men like this take you away, you disappear. They drove me to a nondescript building in downtown Tehran, a place that didn't appear on any maps as a government facility. I was stripped of my phone, my wallet, and my watch, my tangible connections to the outside world, and placed in a small, windowless interrogation room with a metal table and 2 chairs. For hours, I sat there alone, the silence amplifying my anxiety. I thought of Fatima. Would they go after her? I thought of my children. Had I ruined their lives? Fear tried to crawl up my spine, a cold serpent whispering that I should have kept my mouth shut. But then, in the stark quiet of that cell, I closed my eyes and remembered the void. I remembered the darkness that was far worse than this room. And I remembered the light. "Lord," I whispered, "you sent me back for this. Be my strength." A peace, illogical and supernatural, settled over me. I wasn't alone in that room. Finally, the door opened, and a man entered. He was older, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and eyes that were sharp and intelligent. He placed a file on the table, my file. "Dr. Khan," he said smoothly, sitting down opposite me. A man of science, a respected specialist, and now a disruptor of public order. He opened the file. "We have reports that you are proselytizing in a state hospital, spreading Zionist propaganda, distributing illegal literature." He looked up, his gaze boring into me. "Do you deny this?" "I am not spreading propaganda," I answered, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "I am sharing my testimony. I died, sir. I was dead for an hour, and I met the one who sent me back." The interrogator sighed, as if bored by a repetitive story. "We know about your medical episode. The brain plays tricks when deprived of oxygen. Hallucinations are common, but you are using a hallucination to undermine the Islamic values of this nation. You are telling people that a prophet is God. That is shirk. That is a crime against the state." "It was not a hallucination," I said firmly. "I saw him. I felt his scars. He healed me. How can I deny the one who gave me breath? If I deny him, I deny the very life in my veins." The man slammed his hand on the table, the sudden violence echoing in the small room. "You are foolish. Do you think your Jesus will save you here? We can take everything from you, Khan. Your medical license, your home, your family, your freedom. We can make it so you never see the sun again." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a hiss. "Recant. Sign a statement saying you were mentally unstable, that you were confused. Go back to your mosque. Do this, and you can go home tonight. Refuse, and you stay here." The offer hung in the air, tempting and poisonous. To go home. To sleep in my bed. To see Fatima. All I had to do was sign a paper. It was a small lie, a compromise to survive. But then the words of Jesus came to my mind, asterisk, "Whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven." Asterisk. I looked at the interrogator, seeing not a monster, but a man blinded by the same veil I once wore. "I cannot sign," I said softly. "I cannot lie. Jesus is Lord. He is the Savior. And he loves you too." The interrogator stared at me for a long moment, disbelief warring with anger on his face. He had expected fear, begging, or rationalization. He had not expected pity. He stood up, grabbed the file, and walked to the door. "Enjoy the darkness, doctor," he spat, and slammed the door shut. I spent the next 3 weeks in solitary confinement. The cell was a concrete box, damp and cold, with a single bulb that stayed on 24 hours a day, stripping me of the sense of time. I was given meager food, stale bread, and watery soup, and I was allowed no contact with anyone. It was designed to break the mind, to crush the spirit. But they didn't know that they had locked me in with my Savior. In the solitude, my relationship with Jesus deepened in ways that would have been impossible in the comfort of my previous life. I spent hours in prayer, reciting the verses I had memorized from the online Bible, singing songs of worship in a whisper. The cell became a sanctuary. I realized that true freedom wasn't about being outside these walls. It was about being free from the fear of death. I had already died once. What could they threaten me with? Heaven. One day, the door opened, and a different guard threw a beaten-up man into the cell with me. It was unusual. Solitary usually meant solitary. The man was young, his face bruised, his clothes torn. He huddled in the corner, shivering. I moved towards him slowly. "Do not be afraid," I said. "I am a doctor. Let me look at your wounds." He flinched, but allowed me to examine him. He had been beaten badly, likely for political dissent. As I cleaned his cuts with the small amount of water from my cup, I asked him his name. "Ali," he rasped. "I am Khan," I said. "Why are you here?" "Ali," I protested, he said, tears mixing with the dirt on his face. "I just wanted freedom. They call us traitors. There is a freedom they cannot take away," I told him, tearing a strip from my own shirt to bind a gash on his arm. Over the next few days, in the dim light of that prison cell, I told Ali about the man of light. I told him about the love that doesn't bruise, the king who serves, and the freedom that starts in the heart. Ali listened, at first with skepticism, then with a hunger that mirrored my own. In the bowels of an Iranian prison, amidst the smell of mold and despair, another soul was snatched from the darkness. We prayed together, two prisoners set free by the truth. Then, just as suddenly as I was taken, I was released. I never found out exactly why. Perhaps my family's connections pulled strings. Perhaps the hospital needed their specialist, or perhaps, as I believe, God simply wasn't done with me yet. I was dumped on a street corner in Tehran at 3 a.m., thin, bearded, and smelling of the prison, but alive. I walked the empty streets until I found a taxi to take me home. When I arrived, the house was dark. My key still worked. I entered quietly, not wanting to startle Fatima. I went to the bathroom, shaved off the prison beard, showered the stench of the cell off my skin, and looked in the mirror. I was thinner, my face more gaunt, but my eyes were bright. I was a man tested by fire. The next morning, the confrontation with Fatima was inevitable. She was in the kitchen when I walked in. She dropped the teapot she was holding, shattering it on the floor. "Khan," she screamed, rushing to me, checking me for injuries. "They said you might never come back." I was so scared. She held me tight, and for a moment, we were just husband and wife again. But I felt her stiffen. She pulled back, looking at me with tear-filled eyes. "Khan, you must stop. Please. For the children. For me. You cannot keep talking about this Jesus. Next time, they will kill you." I took her hands in mine. "Fatima, my love," I said gently. "I love you more than life itself. But I cannot stop. How can I hide a light that burns so bright? He saved me from the eternal fire. I want you to be saved too. I want us to be together forever, truly forever." She pulled her hands away, stepping back as if I had slapped her. "You are choosing him over us," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I am choosing him for us," I pleaded. "Fatima, just listen to the words. Read the book with me. Just once. If you find no truth in it, I will never speak of it to you again." She looked at me, the conflict raging in her eyes. She had seen the change in me, the patience, the lack of anger, the courage in the face of prison. She knew the old Khan, the proud and somewhat arrogant doctor, was gone. This new man was different. Curiosity, mixed with desperation to save her marriage, won out. "One time," she said, wiping her tears. "I will listen one time." That night, with the curtains drawn and the doors locked, I opened the Bible app on my phone. I didn't start with theology. I started with the story of the woman at the well, a woman rejected, judged, and ashamed, whom Jesus treated with dignity and offered living water. As I read, I saw Fatima's defenses slowly lower. The Jesus of the Bible was not the distant prophet of her upbringing. He was intimate, kind, and overwhelmingly holy. When I finished, she didn't speak for a long time. Then, she looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "He knew everything she ever did," she whispered, "and he still talked to her." "Yes," I said. "He knows everything we have ever done, and he still died for us." She didn't convert that night. It takes time to undo a lifetime of indoctrination. But the seed was planted in the soil of her heart. I was no longer alone in my own house. I returned to work, Not at the hospital. My license was suspended pending investigation, but in a small private clinic run by a friend who didn't care about politics. It was a humbler practice, serving the poor in South Tehran, but it was perfect. Every patient who walked in with a cough or a fever also received a touch of kindness, a prayer, and when the moment was right, a word about the great physician. I knew the danger wasn't over. I was being watched. My phone was likely tapped. But the fear was gone. I had seen the finish line. I knew that whether I lived to be 100 or died tomorrow, I was safe in his hands. The mission Jesus gave me to warn the sleeping world was now my life's work. I was Dr. Khan, the man who died, but I was more alive than I had ever been. And I was just getting started. The suspension of my medical license from the state hospital turned out to be a divine redirection rather than a professional death sentence. While stripped of my prestige and the high salary that came with treating Tehran's elite, I found myself working in the dusty, crowded streets of South Tehran, in a clinic that smelled of antiseptic and poverty. The patients here didn't care about my political standing or my religious controversies. They only cared that I was a doctor who actually listened to them, who touched them with compassion, and who often waived the fee when he saw the desperation in their eyes. This clinic became my pulpit. I wasn't preaching with a microphone, but with my hands, my time, and my heart. Every prescription pad became an opportunity to offer a cure for the body, and every quiet conversation became a chance to offer the cure for the soul. I was operating under the radar, a guerrilla fighter in a spiritual war, knowing that the eyes of the regime were never far away. My relationship with Fatima transformed in the quiet intimacy of our evenings. The one time she agreed to listen turned into a nightly ritual. We moved from the woman at the well to the Sermon on the Mount, then to the crucifixion and the resurrection. I watched as the heavy veil of legalism and fear she had worn her entire life began to unravel, thread by thread. One evening, as we read about the prodigal son, she broke down weeping. I always thought God was waiting to punish me for my mistakes, she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. I never knew he was running down the road to hug me. That night, in our living room, with the blinds drawn tight against the world outside, my wife knelt beside me and gave her heart to al-Masih. The joy that flooded our home was indescribable. We were no longer just husband and wife. We were brother and sister in the kingdom, united by a secret that was more precious than life itself. But secrets in Iran are hard to keep, especially when they change the way you live. Our home began to change. We stopped attending the local mosque, offering vague excuses about my health or work schedule. Instead, our Friday nights became a clandestine gathering. It started with just Fatima and me. Then my brother-in-law, who had seen the change in his sister, joined us. Then a neighbor, a woman whose son had been killed in a protest and who was drowning in grief, came seeking the peace she saw in Fatima's eyes. Soon, we had a small house church of 7 people meeting in our living room. We sang worship songs in whispers, read the scriptures from photocopied pages, and shared communion with flatbread and grape juice. It was dangerous if the Basij raided us. We would all face imprisonment or worse, but it was the most alive any of us had ever felt. The early church in the Book of Acts wasn't just a story we read. It was a reality we were living. The pressure from the authorities, however, never truly vanished. It merely shifted its weight. I received summons for administrative reviews that were thinly veiled interrogations. My bank accounts were randomly frozen for audits. A car would park across the street from my house for hours, the occupants just watching. It was a psychological siege designed to make me crack, to make me flee the country. Many Christians in Iran do flee, seeking asylum in Turkey or Europe, and I didn't judge them. But every time I looked at my passport, I heard his voice, "Go back. My children are sleeping." I knew my assignment was here, in the belly of the beast. I was a watchman on the wall, and a watchman does not abandon his post because the night is dark. One afternoon, a man walked into my clinic. He didn't look like a patient from the neighborhood. He was dressed in a sharp suit, clean-shaven, with an air of authority. I recognized him instantly from the news. He was a high-ranking official within the Ministry of Intelligence. My heart skipped a beat, and my receptionist looked terrified. He signaled for his bodyguards to stay outside and entered my examination room, closing the door behind him. I stood up, bracing myself for an arrest. "Dr. Khan," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "Please sit down. I am not here to arrest you today." I sat, wary and tense. "How can I help you, sir?" He hesitated, the mask of the hardened official slipping for a moment to reveal a man carrying a heavy burden. "My daughter," he said, looking at his hands. "She is dying. Leukemia. The best doctors in Tehran. In Europe they say there is nothing more to do. She is only 12. He looked up at me, desperation in his eyes. "I have heard rumors about you, doctor. Not the political ones. The other ones. They say you pray for people. They say miracles happen." I looked at this man, a representative of the very system that wanted to crush me, and I saw only a desperate father. It was a divine appointment. "I am a doctor, sir," I said gently, "but I am not a magician. However, I know the great physician who can do what I cannot." "Will you come?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I will ensure your safety. No one will know. Just come and see her." I went with him. We drove in an armored car to a palatial estate in the north of the city. His daughter, Layla, lay in a bed that looked too big for her frail body, her skin pale as paper, her breathing shallow. Her mother sat by the bedside, weeping silently. I approached the bed, feeling that familiar electric charge of the Holy Spirit. I didn't need to shout or make a show. I simply took the girl's small, cold hand in mine. I looked at the father and the mother. "I pray in the name of al-Masih," I told them. "He is the healer." The father nodded, too desperate to care about theology. I closed my eyes and prayed, not asking for permission, but standing on the authority I had seen in the void. "Lord Jesus," I prayed, "you are the resurrection and the life. You sent me back to show your power. Show this family who you are. Touch Layla now." I felt a warmth flow through my arm, a tangible current of life moving from me to her. Layla gasped, her eyes fluttering open. The color rushed back into her cheeks, a rosy flush replacing the pallor of death. She sat up, looking around the room, confused but clearly strong. "Papa," she asked. "I'm hungry." The mother screamed and fainted. The father fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably, clutching his daughter's hand. It was a miracle, undeniable and immediate. I stood back, letting the family have their moment, thanking Jesus silently. When the father finally stood up, he looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear. "What did you do?" he whispered. "I did nothing," I replied. "Jesus did it. The same Jesus your government persecutes." The official looked at me, the cognitive dissonance crashing in his mind. He walked me to the door, his hand gripping my shoulder. "You saved my daughter," he said. "I can never repay you. But listen to me, Khan. Leave. Leave Iran. There are factions within the regime, hardliners who do not care about miracles. They see you as a threat that is growing too large. I can protect you for a little while, but not forever. Go while you can." "I cannot go," I told him calmly. "My master put me here. Until he moves me, I stay." He shook his head, amazed at my stubbornness, and let me go. I returned home, knowing that the clock was ticking faster now. The miracle would be whispered about. Secrets in high places leak. The time was short. I gathered my small house church and told them what had happened. We prayed with a fervor we had never known before, knowing that we were walking through the valley of the shadow of death. 2 weeks later, the crackdown came. But it wasn't the arrest I expected. It was a riot staged, of course, outside my clinic. Men shouting slogans, throwing stones, accusing me of being a spy. They set fire to the building. I watched from down the street as my clinic, my sanctuary for the poor, burned to the ground. I felt a pang of grief for the loss, but also a strange sense of liberation. They could burn the building, but they couldn't burn the spirit. They couldn't burn the truth that had already been planted in hundreds of hearts. I went home to find Fatima packing a bag. She wasn't fleeing, she was preparing for prison. "If they come," she said, her eyes fierce with a new courage, "I want to be ready. I will not deny him, Khan. I will not." I hugged her, thanking God for the warrior he had made her. But they didn't come for us that night. Instead, I had a dream. In the dream, I saw the map of Iran, but it wasn't dark. It was covered in thousands of tiny pinpricks of light fires starting in homes, in basements, in prisons. The fires were growing, connecting, spreading until the whole nation was glowing. I heard the voice of Jesus again, clear as a bell. "The harvest is ready. Do not fear the fire. You are the fire." I woke up with a clarity that surpassed all understanding. I realized that my resurrection wasn't just about my physical body. It was a prophetic sign for my nation. Iran was dead, buried under layers of religious oppression and hopelessness, but Jesus was coming to resurrect it. The revival was not something that would happen. It was happening now. It was happening in the tears of the father whose daughter was healed, in the heart of the prisoner Ali, in the courage of my wife, and in the thousands of secret believers risking everything. I decided then to change my strategy. If I couldn't have a clinic, I would be a mobile doctor. I began traveling to villages, to the underground networks of believers, teaching them, encouraging them, and sharing the vision of the coming king. I became a ghost in the system, moving before they could catch me, fueled by a supernatural energy. One evening, standing on a hillside overlooking Tehran, the city lights flickering below like the stars of the galaxy, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Arash, the young student with the heart condition, now a leader in the underground youth movement. "Doctor," he said, smiling, "we have new believers. 50 of them. They want to be baptized. Tonight." 50, I asked, smiling back. "We're in the river," he said. "It's freezing, but they don't care." We went down to the riverbank in the dark. The water was icy, but the fire in our hearts kept us warm. One by one, I dunked them into the water, students, grandmothers, mechanics, soldiers. As they came up, gasping and laughing, I saw the same light in their eyes that I had seen in the void. They had met him too. I looked up at the sky, waiting for the inevitable sirens, the headlights of the secret police, but there was only silence and the stars. I remembered the warning Jesus gave me. "I am coming soon." I realized that soon wasn't a threat. It was a promise. It was the hope that kept us running. I am Dr. Khan. I died for an hour, but I have never been more alive. My heart beats on borrowed time, and every beat is a drum of war against the darkness. To you listening to my story, do not think this is just a tale from a faraway land. The same Jesus who pulled me from the void is standing at the door of your heart. The world is sleeping on the edge of a cliff. Wake up. The great physician is here, and the cure is free. But you must take it before the night comes. I am waiting for the trumpet to sound, and when it does, I will not be a stranger to the king. I will be his friend, the one who didn't stay silent. Until then, I walk the streets of Iran, a dead man walking, bringing life to the dead. Maranatha. Come, Lord Jesus.